Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings, and we are on book 5 of Marcus Didius Falco. Poseidon's Gold is the old murder mystery chestnut of the investigator of the mystery has been accused of the murder and thus must investigate it in order to prove himself innocent. What's very interesting about this is that in the first book, it was established right off the bat that Falco had a older brother who had died in the Judean revolts. That is, back when Rome took over what is now Israel, the locals were not surprisingly unhappy with this, and so they revolted and fought back and didn't win. Because in spite of all of the ways that the Jewish people historically prop themselves up in their own minds and internal beliefs about history or what have you, the fact is that it was a relatively small group of people living in a desert, and the Romans were pretty much able to roll right over them anyways. And Falco's brother had wound up dying. Somehow it was not entirely clear how, but apparently as a hero, and had left behind a girlfriend with a daughter, and had left behind a family that was, mourning the loss of this son who was, among other things, apparently handsome and brilliant and charming and friendly. But in the course of this book, it's also it becomes clear because we get a lot more talk about the brother. We get a lot more a deeper look into Didius Falco's brother, who it turns out was not, that in the first book, it's made fairly clear that at the very least, his mother and younger brother both were effectively well aware that the older brother Festus was perhaps not quite as heroically wonderful as people like to say. That, he was the kind of person who made friends wherever he went, that he was clever and handsome and all of that, but that he was also a bit of a wastrel, and there's implications in earlier books, perhaps, that he was more of one of those good-looking guys who has everything fall into his lap but isn't actually talented. And as we read this book, it becomes clear that it's not quite that. He was talented, he was smart, but he didn't ultimately have the greatest judgment. And so what happens in this book is that we pick up more or less where the last one left off, and Falco comes home to find that one of his brother's old centurion buddies has shown up and has parked himself in Falco's mother's home, and has basically been making something of a nuisance of himself. And it turns out that what he's there for is money. That he's claiming that Festus owed him money, and that he wants to get that money back. And so that's already a problem, because part of the issue, of course, is that Falco has no way of proving that his brother didn't owe the other guy money. Like, that it's kind of a my word against yours thing, and the one guy is currently an active member of, a Roman legion and a well-respected soldier, and Falco is a PI, which is not the world's most well-respected profession. Apparently even less so in Rome. So, it's not a great thing. And then the man who threatened them is found dead in an incredibly gruesome killing that involved being stabbed and repeatedly hacked, and there's apparently just blood all over the scene, and it's genuinely horrifying. And the problem is that because this man and Falco got into a tussle, Falco was attacked and they have a big public fight. Falco is obviously the first person that everybody suspects of killing him because, I mean, if nothing else, you have a big public fight in which weapons were drawn. That's really gonna stick in people's minds. And so Falco's friend Petronius is effectively a cop and is in sort of this unfortunate bind of saying that no, he really doesn't think that his friend did it, but Falco is also the person that currently all of the evidence points to. So Falco has to look into this and has to figure out what money his brother owed this guy, which trail leads back to his much maligned father because Falco has resented his father for walking out on them, which by the end of this book, it's sort of, it's implied in earlier books also that his father walked out on them and never looked back and so on, and it turns out that he kind of totally did look back, and it's very implicit again that Falco was sort of resenting his father perhaps more than he ought to have, effectively because his mother was upset that, he'd never asked his mother, why did Dad leave? And his mother, at the end of this book, says, well, no, it's sometimes, people just get sick of each other, so he left. And it's sort of this, you mean all of these years we've resented him because we thought that he ran off with a floozy or abandoned us, and it's just basically a divorce? Because they don't get this whole book is very full of uncomfortable familial interactions. The uncomfortable discovery that Falco's niece, that he had definitively stated in the first book was absolutely his brother's kid, may actually have been his kid because his brother had literally shoved Falco, that Festus had shoved Falco at Festus's girlfriend because he needed the girlfriend and his brother distracted, because Festus needed Falco and Marina distracted while he tried to get the money back recouped from this failure of a sort of a financial transaction that he'd been doing. And so Falco and Marina had slept together exactly once, but that could have been enough. And so, it's sort of this incredibly awkward thing that is one of those family secrets that continues to hang over his head. And this is just a whole book of incredibly uncomfortable personal revelations and family stuff. And it's a drastic change in a way from previous books, which have been all about political intrigues and him investigating murders and politics and missing centurions and all kinds of stuff. And here he's digging into his brother's past. He's digging into a lot of uncomfortable family things. And along the way, of course, we also keep on running into a whole bunch of things where, for example, he's like, Mom, why didn't you tell me about this knife? And his mother's like, well, I knew where it went the whole time. And all of these things where he keeps on finding out a whole bunch of stuff later that might have made this whole investigation go more smoothly if, people had just told him things. Anyways, it turns out by the end of the book that his brother wasn't quite as bad as he thought, because the people that his brother had sold an incredibly expensive statue to had basically, when the statue had, that the brother had an agent who had handed the statue over to the agent of the people who were buying it, and then the people who were buying it when it was lost then decided to blame Festus, who didn't know his agent had not taken the statue directly. He thought that the statue had gone directly. It had not. But then they went after him for this money, which he didn't have, which was a whole whack of money. And it's this incredibly twisty series of things that Falco sort of has to dig through a whole, like, just numbers and numbers of people to backtrack through everything. And at the end of this book, at the end of it, he's finally asked his father for a favor and a loan to get the money that he needs in order to move up a caste level. Because this is sort of his big ambition, is to move up from serfdom into middle class, in effect, so that he can finally marry his girlfriend, who is, after all, patrician. She's of a noble class, and, you know, and that falls through because the emperor's younger son is a jerk and turns him down. And Falco sort of just has to walk away from this because he's not going to fight with the emperor's son, because he knows that the elder son will not care and the emperor will back his younger son, which means that even though he had, you know, been told by Vespasian that he could get this if he produced the money, that it's just not, that since he bypassed everything and went to the younger son instead of going to Vespasian, who was out of Rome at that particular moment, it's kind of all falls apart on him, you know, at the end. And so this whole book is, you know, it's all gumshoe legwork. It's all interviewing witnesses, half of whom lie to him, and interviewing people who don't know very much, and dealing with a father who's being cagey and difficult, and a mother who's being cagey and difficult, and family members who are being cagey and difficult because everybody is constantly not quite telling him enough, and so he's just trying to figure things out. And it's just one long series of misadventures and gumshoe legwork, and it's very, very absorbing. It's a, you know, the whole thing is very, very personal. This is the most fundamentally personal type of murder mystery story, where it's not merely that the investigator is accused of a murder, it's that the investigator has to investigate his own family and family history in order to find out who murdered the murder victim. So that all pans out, and then at the very end, because he promised his mother to find out exactly what happened with his brother, he goes to a bunch of Judean slaves, because this is ancient Rome and there are slaves, because that's what happens, and he pays them for information about what happened to his brother, because he's basically after finding out from people who will not require him to trek all the way out to Judea, will not require him to deal with the army. And the slaves, they tell him that his brother died because somebody shot an arrow that managed to get in between his armor and his helmet, and Falco's like, yeah, that is exactly like my brother, not wearing his helmet properly so that an arrow gets him in the neck. And it sort of is a topper on everything that happens. You know, that his brother died kind of exactly the way that he actually could see it happening. Anyway, so this is fun. It's a delightful book, serious where it needs to be, funny where it needs to be, with a lot of familial drama. If you like familial drama, this is a good book for it. So that's everything, and I will see you all next week.